Good morning, everyone. I've only just got back from Japan last night, so if I'm not up to speed, I'll blame it on jet lag. Hey, I'm going to talk about the brood box. It's often a part of the beehive that is really neglected by a lot of beekeepers. So if we look at honeybees, they've got a long history of living very successfully without absolutely any human interaction in their traditional habitats for thousands and thousands of years. And even today, they say that people meddling with beehives is often quite harmful. They would seasonally swarm, populate new nests, produce honey and readily sting anybody or anything that threatened them. As you see by all the bear cartoons, the bees would protect from their honey from the bears. So once we started placing them in the various forms of man-made beehives, their behaviour needed to be managed by their keeper. Otherwise, you just couldn't work your bees, so it's just too aggressive. Eventually, calmer bees with less swarming behaviour became readily available, although that is not always the case. And some beekeepers that don't really manage their queens end up with bees that start going back to those sort of traits of being really hard to work and quite aggressive. So the beehive is a super colony, and they can do really amazing things if they're set up properly. If they're not set up properly, it won't happen, but if you have your hive in a good way, it's going to do really, really amazing things for you if the resources allow it to do so. Their organisation means that the queen basically rules the colony, but at the same time, the colony rules the queen. If she's not doing the right thing, if she's getting too old, they will often make a new queen because they need the colony to keep on going. Bees captivate many tens of thousands of recreational beekeepers in Australia and all around the world. They also generate income for semi-commercial beekeepers, and realistically, anyone that has more than 5 or 10 hives falls into that category. A recreational beekeeper has a very small number of hives. Once you get a few more hives, you're producing honey, you're probably selling that, you're making an income, and already at that 5 or 10 hive level, you need to start thinking about your obligations to the entire industry in Australia. And once you reach 20 or 30 beehives, you're producing enough honey that you should be paying the honey levy. That is a legal requirement. All the commercial beekeepers pay it. The whole Varroa response was funded by some of this and all the research. So start thinking about yourself. Once you get a little bit bigger than 1 or 2 hives, that you need to start putting back into your industry. The commercial beekeeping families are running at least 300 or 400 hives per beekeeper to achieve their standalone incomes. You need a lot of bees to make a good income without other income coming in, but they can do it with just 300 or 400 beehives per beekeeper. So whilst there are many different designs used around the world, the Langstroth is by far the most common design in use, and that's basically what I'll be talking about today. If you look at the life cycle of a bee colony, the whole thing is around building up adequate reserves of honey and stored pollen. It's basically like money in a bank for us. If you don't have money, you're skint, you're flat broke, you can't do stuff. You need that money. So that will sustain those colonies over very long, harsh winters where a lot of the bees have originated from. If they survive the winter, meaning they didn't go broke, then they work hard from late winter through spring to breed up enough bees to refill all the empty spots in the colony and fill it right up. And then, just like some lucky parents, they fill the caravan with as much food, drink and dollars as they can, kiss their children goodbye, say goodbye to their home, and they're gone. Basically swarming. So swarming is something that naturally would occur in a beehive. And often this happens just before or as a good honey flow is about to start, meaning the swarm that takes off has a good opportunity to re-establish itself for the next winter. But we don't like swarming. I know some people think it's great, but generally speaking, we don't like it. Commercial beekeepers get angry when their hives swarm. All their hard work is just flown out the door. So any beekeeper who values hive health and production should try everything they can to prevent swarming. That means you need to be managing your brood box. Swarming robs a colony of its established queen and half its bee population. It forces the remaining colony to raise a new queen, which can be a very dangerous time because not every one of those will be successful. It also means that pests like small hive beetle get an opportunity to attack the colony because they have all these resources, but half the bees just took off and they're not able to protect them all. So there's a lot of destabilisation happening in the colony. So it's a very dangerous time. And swarm hives produce very little honey for that season compared to those in the same apiary that did not. And that's very easy to see when you stop hive swarming, how much honey they can produce in a season or a short period of time compared to those that swarmed and have to completely rebuild themselves. And when you've had swarm colonies and you see this sort of thing happening, it's very, very devastating for yourself. So try to stop swarming. So you have to have managed beehives. So ever since humans began capturing colonies of bees, there's been much learning about how best to run their bees. And each of us as a beekeeper relearns everything. We find out what works for us or what suits our lifestyle. Some believe that you should do absolutely nothing to disturb them. Others believe you should do as little as possible. Others tend to them more often. Others take so much from their hives that they run them into the ground. They kill hives by being too greedy. But the best beekeepers visit their hives regularly enough and supply whatever the bees require to maintain a balanced system. And the best beekeepers in Australia can regularly get well in excess of 150, 200 or even sometimes 300 kilograms of honey per hive in a season, depending on what's happening. They're running Formula One beehives because they put a lot of effort into maintaining that hive where it needs to be and reading the trees and the seasons. That's an elite part of a bell curve, but they can do that. So to really manage your bees well, there are some things that you need to accept. You do need to open your hives regularly and not just taking the lid off, getting right down to that brood box. You need to regularly pull the queen excluder off, making sure you don't damage it. Push the hive tool down, don't leave it on the excluder. Otherwise it's no longer a queen excluder, there's a hole and she can come up. You've got to look inside the brood box. That excluder is only there to maintain the queen in a specified brood area so that she can be as efficient as possible and you can manage her as efficiently as possible within that space. It's not there to stop you from going down into it, so get used to pulling that excluder off. You need to regularly inspect the brood combs, which means you need to pull them out of the brood hive, out of the brood box. And you've got to look at how well is the queen laying, how healthy the brood may look. So you're always looking for signs of brood diseases. How much pollen is there? Because pollen is the protein that builds bees. And then how much honey and nectar is there, which is their energy to fulfill them or to get them through winter. At different times of the season, you need different amounts of that in the brood box. And is there enough room there for what you want the queen to do? Like this time of the year, we've been giving them as much space as possible so they can breed up bees in that brood box. So man, when you're looking in there, you've got to lift out those brood combs. But as you can see on the left-hand side there, lots of bees. So you've got to shake those bees off to give you that beautiful frame that you can now look at to see if there's anything that is not healthy about that brood. And that frame there, that is what a brood box is all about. Frames full of brood in a small part of the beehive. So to really manage the bees well, you also need to look at the queen. It may be beneficial to mark the queen so that you can see her, because there are a lot of people that have never seen their queens. You've got to be able to find her. You might want to clip a wing. A lot of people do that. They'll clip left one year, right the next year, or whatnot. But please, just like looking for varroa mites, make sure that you're wearing these things if your eyesight's not great. Otherwise, you might end up with two halves of the queen instead of taking a small piece off the wing. Now, the old queens are more likely to swarm. Always. Older queens will always swarm more readily than young queens. So the older the queen, the more management you need to do to stop them from swarming. They'll often be the first ones out the door. Like sometimes even in July around here, they're off. They're ready to go. They want to get as good a start as they can. So if you look at the commercial beekeepers, many requeen their hives generally every 18 to 24 months, whilst the high production operators may replace most of those queens within 12 months. There's one commercial beekeeper that told me that he puts 1.1 queens into every hive per season, meaning he has some queens that he replaces, they don't do good enough, and he replaces them again within that 12-month period. And that is very different to how some beekeepers run their bees, where they just let them swarm and requeen themselves, and their genetics generally go down, they get a little bit more angry, things like that. So to look at saving your hive, sometimes you need to kill its queen, which might sound strange, but there are times when you might say, I can't stop these bees from going. I've either got to pull the queen out in a nuke or kill the queen and let the bees make up a new young queen for that season. And that's a good example with preventing swarming in spring. Sometimes just removing that queen and letting the bees make a new queen is better than doing nothing at all. It's not as good as buying a good quality mated queen, but it's better than just letting your bees swarm off, because you also lost half those bees. In New South Wales and many parts of Australia, we have the Code of Practice. The Australian Honeybee Industry Biosecurity Code of Practice, which we generally call the Code. Now, this has minimum standards by which you are expected to manage your beehives. They're the minimum standards. You can do more than that, but you shouldn't be doing less. Now, during the Varroa response, we saw that many beekeepers in this area were not managing their bees at all, let alone by the code. And the code's been a legal requirement in Australia for a number of years before Varroa even was found. So beekeepers should be managing their bees by the code, and it's not onerous. And you'll get a lot more out of your bees if you do that. Now, also, having Varroa does not mean that all your bees will die or that you can no longer keep bees in this area. It just means that you need to do more management of your bees. So following that code is a great bare minimum to allowing you to manage your bees well with Varroa all around us. And they're all over the place. I brought bees back about a year ago, and within one day, one of the colonies that I was doing surveillance on already had Varroa mites dropping on a sticky mat. Within a week, every hive I brought back already had mites that had come into the hive. So you can't evade Varroa anymore. You just need to learn to manage their numbers, like weeds in your lawn, keep the numbers down, and your bees will be just fine. So these are just a few of the things that we've seen in the Varroa response. You just got boxes and junk everywhere. You've got hives that are basically dead, full of disease, and there are even hives that are way back in the Lantana that hadn't been open for years, and all sorts of other things. Hives with just a few frames in the brood box and the rest naturally drawn comb, things like that. They were unmanaged hives that someone had. They weren't managed bee colonies. And as a beekeeper, you should be managing your colonies. And things like this, how can you expect to get honey when that's what your brood box looks like? So the minimum looking at your brood is at least 2 brood checks every season, and that roughly is 1 in spring and 1 in autumn. On some of my colonies, I've done 2 or 3 brood checks already since late winter. If they're not doing as good as others, you need to check them more often and manage them. You need to accept and plan and requeen your hive regularly, and don't rely on them swarming and replacing their own queen if you can help it. And sometimes you might look at replacing queens in January or February, letting them go through winter, and you'll have spectacular hives in spring because they didn't swarm. Or you could stop them swarming because they were not building up to swarm as quickly as the old queens. And if a hive is not performing as well as the rest, then investigate why. Why isn't it doing the same as my other hives? So I always say to people, it's easier to keep 2 hives than 1 because you can compare. Is the queen old and past the prime? Are there pest or disease issues? Is the queen excluder clogged up? That's one a lot of people miss. Half the excluder is blocked up with wax and propolis. Of course, it's hard for the bees to go through it, so they'll just plug up your brood nest. It's always good to have a spare queen excluder. You can swap it out, clean the other one up, put it back on later on when you need it. Other issues with poor nutrition, like no pollen, or there's only one type of pollen and a poor quality one at that. All of those things will impact on how well your bees are breeding up. You look at Dr. Doug Somerville's book, Fat Bees, Skinny Bees. Those fat, healthy bees will do 10 times as much as skinny, unhealthy, low-protein bees. Is there a problem with nosema? Something a lot of us never look at. You know, you've got to look at why your bees may not be doing as well as they could be. And you need to be prepared to step in and take action, not just let it go. She'll be right does not always work very well with bee management. So everything that a hive will ever be is because of the brood box. So for a colony to be productive, it needs to have a surplus of field bees. Field bees are hard-working ladies that do not last very long. And the better the protein that they were reared on, the longer they will actually last when they become field bees. So poor quality protein bees eventually get to the field and they die very quickly, so they don't put much back into the hive. High protein bees will work for a lot longer and your hive will do a lot better. These field bees owe their existence to the hive, and they will end their days paying off that debt in either nectar or pollen to put back into the hive again. And they are expendable. The colony knows they're expendable and we need to think the same thing. You can't save every bee, and field bees are on their last days anyway. But to have a lot of expendable field bees, you first need to ensure the colony has lots of bees. So that swarm colony just lost half the bees, so it doesn't have lots of bees. It won't do what a colony next to it that hasn't swarmed can do. So ensure the queen has lots of available space to lay eggs, and that's really critical early in the season. As things start to warm up, the queen wants to lay. She can lay 2,000 eggs a day. She needs somewhere to put them all. Remove frames clogged up with old honey and pollen and give her fresh space to lay out. So you look at a frame like this, it's got lovely, beautiful pollen. I'm going to have to go faster, but that frame shouldn't be in the brood box anymore. If you look at this, everything that the hive will ever be is because of the brood box. So on that right-hand picture, that was the entire colony of bees. That colony cannot do anything, it will probably die out. The one in the middle even, there's 3 frames of bees there. That is not a colony, it's maybe a newt. And that photo on the left, that is a horrible, horrible frame that you should never see in a brood box. It should not be there. This is what you should be seeing. Frames full of bees, lots of space. If you look in that frame in the middle there, that frame has only been in literally for a week and a bit. They've laid the eggs and they've capped it. You can see they have not even finished drawing it out, but nearly that entire frame is just brood, very quickly turning into bees. That is what we want in a brood box. And as you can see on this one here on the left, on the right there, that's one of when Mark was in his previous role, that is how he used to manage his surveillance hives that he looked at very frequently. You can see there's lots of spaces, lots of eggs, there's lots of larvae. That's a second frame in, and lots of bees in a colony. That's what you need in your brood box. So please put an effort into managing your brood box, and it will give you a lot back in return. That is what your brood box should be. Thank you.